It's my great pleasure to be here tonight to introduce Joel Morwood to you. I'm so glad so many people turned out. I'm very excited, and this is something I've looked forward to for a long time. Let me tell you a little bit about Joel. I met Joel about 5 years ago. I was attending a lecture by a spiritual teacher down in Santa Cruz, and I happened to find a CD that was left by a student of Joel's who was subversively leaving a CD of another teacher. And so I picked it up and I put it in my car, and I had it sitting there for quite a long time. And I eventually put it in the CD player and listened to it, and I thought, this is amazing. This guy really rocks. I've been on this sort of spiritual seeker path for about 35 years and seen a lot of teachers and heard a lot of lectures and stuff. And I thought this guy is amazing because he cites all of his sources. He hasn't patented or copyrighted anything that he's teaching. And he didn't seem to have an agenda. And so then I went out and I found his book, which is called Naked Through the Gate. And it talks about his spiritual awakening process and how he had been a Marxist revolutionary, and he had been a Vietnam vet, and he had been a Hollywood filmmaker. And he unexpectedly had an awakening, or a series of awakenings, and he just seemed to be off the beaten path of teachers I had heard. So I started listening to his lectures, and I probably have heard, 100 or more hours of his talks. And he, as I said, he cites his sources. He can speak effortlessly and fluidly from many different religions and mystical practices. He connects the dots in a way that I find very rare. And he's very down to earth in a sort of New York plain speaking kind of way. Has a great sense of humor, which I've appreciated quite a bit. So when this non-dual conference came about this year, I just had a crazy thought that maybe we could invite Joel to come to speak at CIIS, since he's a connector of dots, and CIIS is a place that does that too. And so I was very happy to have a meeting yesterday with Joel and with Joe Supiondo. The three of us talked about the connections that might be made between Joel's Center for Sacred Sciences up in Eugene, Oregon, and CIIS, so something may come of that as well. So with no further ado, I'd love to turn the evening over to Joel, and assuming the electronics will cooperate with us, his wireless microphone is going to work. So please welcome, in a CIIS, warm-hearted kind of way, Joel Morwood from Eugene, Oregon.
Where's the bride? I feel like I'm walking down the aisle here. First of all, it's not true that my work isn't copyrighted. They are copyrighted. Also, the student who put my tapes out, another teacher's talk, was totally unauthorized. I don't do that, and I don't approve of it. But since you're all here, maybe something interesting will come of it. First of all, I want to know, how many of you here are therapists? Wow. How many of you here have been in therapy? You don't have to raise your hand for that. Is that everyone? Okay. So I am really, really honored to be here. And especially because I am not a therapist. And in fact, I'm not even a scholar. And in fact, I have no degrees. I dropped out my freshman year in college and went off to fish shrimp in the Florida Keys. So I have no credentials of that sort.
Have you ever been in therapy?
No. Oh, no, actually, that's not quite true. 2 unsuccessful brief times in therapy. So here I am at this invitation of the CIIS people, and I don't know quite why, but I thought maybe there is something I could share with you. And that is some observations that I've made over the years based on my own path and my own awakening, which occurred on August 13th, 1983. And then about 20 years of being a spiritual teacher subsequently to that. and then a lot of reading of mystics of the various traditions. So I do want to warn you here that I also live in Eugene, Oregon, and we're kind of off the beaten path up there. I'm not familiar with the latest developments in the confluence of psychotherapy and non-duality. I'm not familiar with a lot of your vocabulary, although I'm learning very much coming down here. It's been really great. I have a very bad memory for details, like if I tell a story, if I make a quote from memory, it won't be exact, but I usually get the gist of it right. And I have terrible pronunciation of names. I have trouble with English, but especially when it comes to foreign names. So if you don't understand the pronunciation, or correct me if you know what I'm talking about and I'm not pronouncing it right. So let me start by saying, after my awakening, my awakening occurred after I had abandoned my path and dropped all my practices. And so when it happened, I thought it was just a matter of pure grace, totally spontaneous, and there was no connection to what had gone before. And then after a while, first of all, I ended up at the house of a mystic philosopher, Franklin Merrill Wolff, and under his guidance and reading more mystics and then becoming a spiritual teacher myself, I began to see, at least for myself, that wasn't true. That the practices and the path were crucial to my awakening, only it happened in a very paradoxical way. And I thought maybe that's what I would try to talk about this evening. I think this is summed up nicely by a Sufi poet, Hafiz, who writes, Hafiz. Thank you. That must be Eliot. Although union with the beloved is never given as a reward for one's efforts, strive, O heart, as much as you are able. And I think this really states this paradox very succinctly. Union is not given as a reward for efforts, so why strive as much as possible? So to understand how the path and practices work, at least from my point of view, I think it's important to understand how, more precisely, how realization or enlightenment or awakening or whatever term you want to use occurs. And I know there's these terms can be used quite differently, so maybe we will run into semantic problems. So let me make clear, this is the way I use these terms and the way I define them. So if you have a different definition, it's a semantic disagreement here. But Ramana Maharshi, I think most of you have heard of, the great Hindu sage of the last century, described it this way. If the mind is turned in towards the source of illumination, objective knowledge ceases and the self alone shines as the heart. And of course, that's the big self with a big S, the Atman, your true nature, your true self. Now, listen to Zen master Dogen. Different tradition, but here's what he says. Stop the intellectual practice of investigating words and chasing after talk. Study the backward step of turning the light and shining it back. Body and mind will drop away of themselves, and your original face will appear. The light here is the light of attention. And when Ramana says mind, I think he was talking about more precisely in English, is the mind, the attention turns back to its source. Here's the Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, in case you think this is just an Eastern thing. If this will turns away from itself and from all creation for one instant, and back to its first source, then the will stands in its true and free state. And will is very closely associated with attention. Usually where we place our will, that's where our attention goes. Some of you tried to meditate, know that's not always the case. You place your will on your breath and your attention someplace else. But generally speaking, if the way we direct ourselves, what we're looking at, if we can turn that back to its original source, that's the key. So I like to think of this as a kind of a metaphor, crude, because they're always crude in this situation, but attention is sort of a wave of consciousness or a wave of awareness that rises out of this limitless ocean of consciousness. And it's the capacity of consciousness to direct itself at various forms, at various phenomena. Actually, intellectually, we could say that it creates these forms and phenomena, but for our purposes, just for a practical matter, it's always moving out and it's lighting on various things. And so what has to occur is this wave of attention has to collapse back into the ocean. And then there's the possibility, not the guarantee, but the possibility that it can recognize itself, consciousness, as the fundamental nature of everything, and of course, including ourselves. The great Dzogchen master, Garb Dorje, did I get that right? Thank you. Good, thank you. Here's what he says. Awareness itself is self-liberated by means of awareness. One's own true nature simply encounters itself, but its essence transcends all expression in words. So again, this idea of awareness encountering awareness, attention encountering consciousness. That's the key. So we could say, it's really simply a matter of paying attention. I mean, that's all there is to it. But as we know, that isn't so easy. It may be simple, but it's not easy. So why? Why is it so difficult? And this is what we need to understand if we are interested in having this realization, this awakening. And if you survey the various traditions, I think you'll find there's a unanimous agreement that the main obstacle, is the delusion that we are not this infinite ocean of consciousness, but we are some limited, finite ego self. So here's, for instance, the founder of Veda school of Hinduism, Shankara. Man's life of bondage to the world of birth and death has many causes. The root of them all is the ego, the first begotten child of ignorance. When the ego is completely destroyed, the mind is cleared of the obstacles which obstruct its knowledge of oneness with Brahman. And Brahman is, of course, the Hindu term for the ultimate reality, that limitless consciousness. Here's the Tibetan master Bokar Rinpoche. The fundamental dysfunction of our minds takes the form of a separation between I and other. We falsely grasp at an I on which attachment grafts itself, and at the same time we conceive of an aversion to other. So it's the same teaching here. And then here's the anonymous Christian author of the great classic, The Cloud of Unknowing. You must realize and experience for yourself that unless you lose self, you will never reach your goal. For whoever you are, and whatever you do, or however you try, that elemental sense of your own blind being will remain between you and your God. So this is, again, a universal teaching of the mystics of all these traditions. So, then I think most of a spiritual path, in terms of the time and energy we put in, is the getting to know the mechanism of this delusion. How does it work? How is it constructed? This is really extremely important, and this is not the mystery part of mysticism. And I would hope that this is what you people as therapists, as particularly therapists who are interested in non-dual wisdom, would be really interested. And what I look forward to is a time when we have a psychology of delusion, if you like, that we really understand in detail how this works. So I'm going to just give you some very broad strokes of my understanding based on reading these mystics, my own experience, and the experience of my students. By no means do I mean it to be exhaustive, and I think some of it is ground you already know very well, so we're going to be covering some old ground here. But let me just give you a little sketch from my perspective. The delusion of self begins with the reification of an imaginary distinction between I and other, subject and object, self and world. We take that distinction to be real. It is created by imagination. We project it onto experience, and then we take it to be real. In fact, all distinctions are imaginary. We project them onto experience, and we take them to be real. I think it's really important that the problem is not the distinction, that imagination creates distinctions. I mean, this is the glory of the human mind, of language, of art, of thought, and all that. We create distinctions all over the place. But when we take them to be real, we think they're real, then we are locked into living the world that we created. And it becomes fixed. And there we are, stuck. And I just think that's a really important point to make. Based on this fundamental distinction, then, we have thoughts, we have plans, we have expectations, imagery, all this is woven into a story, an ongoing story in our minds. I call it the story of I. The story stars this character named I, and this, whenever you are starring in the movie, that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, that is totally captivating. It's like watching a soap opera where you're literally the star, and then you turn it on and you watch yourself. Or another example is if you've ever tried to meditate and people in the next room are talking about you. Try to switch that one off. I mean, But your mind is doing this all day long, isn't it? It's talking about you. This story is fueled by this very powerful desires and aversions. And they get trapped into the story, and they become self-centered desires and aversions. And I want to note that. Not desire and aversion is a problem in itself, but when it becomes identified with this self. And then this soap opera, this has a title. It's called The Self's Search for Happiness. And you tune in, every morning you wake up, tune in. Is the self going to get happy? Will I get happy? Will I get what will I get what I want, and that will make me happy? Will I avoid what I don't want and escape suffering? And this is writ large. Will I get my soulmate? Will I get the rewarding, satisfying career? Will I get the house in Berkeley Hills that overlooks the whole city with a fabulous view where I'm staying right now? It comes close, but it will not bring you abiding happiness. But this also applies to when you wake up in the morning and you want something for breakfast. And you think, I'll have the Cheerios this morning. I haven't Cheerios for a while. I'll go have them. That's good for my heart and all that. And I got some fresh bananas here. And you go in the closet and your spouse is eating all the Cheerios. It's a little disappointment. You didn't get what you want. All day long, if you watch, this is the self's search for happiness. It's relentless. We have a few moments sometimes when genuine love and compassion breaks through, but 90% of our lives is being driven by this plot. And because it's so captivating, this is where our attention goes. Our attention is absorbed in the story. And the whole story is directed out to acquiring things, whether they're possessions, physical possessions, material possessions, whether they're people, jobs, careers, whether they're subtle things, status, respect, love, whatever it is, but it's all directed out. And this keeps attention moving out, fixated on the world out there, and it's actually moving away from that ocean of consciousness, which in this dualistic perspective is in here. It's not actually in here, but that's the way it appears. And so attention is not allowed to collapse back into that ocean. It's constantly being held up by this, driven by this story of I. So, the practices of the path are primarily designed to interrupt this story and to dismantle this delusion and free attention so it can collapse back into that ocean of consciousness and recognize itself. But here's the rub. from the point of view of delusion, from the point of view of the ego, this is death. This is saying you have to die. And it's very clear in the writings of the mystics of the great traditions. St. Teresa of Avila compares the seeker to a silkworm which transforms into a butterfly. But she says, "Note very carefully, daughters, the silkworm has of necessity to die, and it is this that will cost you the most." And the Sufi poet Rumi writes, so behead yourself of selfhood, O warrior. Become selfless and annihilated like a dervish. Can't put it more strongly than that, can you? And here's the great Hindu saint Mirabai. If you want to offer love, be prepared to cut off your head and sit on it. Be like the moth which circles the lamp and offers its body. Be like the deer which on hearing the hunter's horn offers its head to the hunter. Be like the fish which yields up its life when separated from the sea. Now, to the ego, this does not sound very attractive. This does not sound like the way to go, to get happiness. This sounds like the path to death and destruction and chaos and horror and everything else. Even if you understand intellectually, yes, it's true, ultimately nothing dies because the ego is not really there and so forth and so on. This is not a matter of the head. This is a matter of the heart. This is the matter of the bones, of the flesh, the gut. And when seekers really start to grok this, stop reading Mirabai's beautiful poetry and start reading as, this is where this path goes. You know, it creates fear. It can create very intense fear. Aya Khema, who's a contemporary, or was, died recently, a contemporary Buddhist teacher, she writes about this coming up in meditation, this fear. She says, it may arise particularly when we come near to seeing impermanence in ourselves very strongly. Then there is great fear, even panic, that we may find a truth we don't want to know, namely that this identity, this personality is a myth. Fear is the first and foremost hindrance to going deeper. So this problem is not just an intellectual problem. This is a problem that affects us, you know, from our head to our toe, from our mind to our heart, and beyond. And so while at one level, the task of the path and the practices is cognitive, and there's a lot of practices and a lot of effort in many traditions of looking into how the self is constructed. And this is, you know, doing this moment to moment in meditation, very closely observing, you know. And you can see this fictitious I. You know, it's right there. You just listen to your mind for a while. You watch that soap opera and you see the character walking around. And the more you see that it's just thought, the more you can disidentify with it. And all this is, you know, really important thing to do. But at another level, and what I would call a psychological or psycho-spiritual level, the path is about helping the seeker overcome this terror of enlightenment. And it really is for anybody who really confronts it. So there are two main approaches on a spiritual path, and I'm using big brush strokes, and they really are two poles of a spectrum, and there's many side things in between, and these are by no means exclusive, but there's traditionally, to use the Sanskrit terms, there's the Jnana approach and the Bhakti approach. And if you are a Jnani, following the path of knowledge, as it's usually translated, your task is to find your true self. This is the big search, the quest. Who am I? And you go looking for that self. This is beautifully summed up by Zen master Hakuin, and he says, determined to see into your inherent Buddha nature, you should constantly ask yourself, who is hosting your seeing and hearing? No matter what you are doing, whether you are walking, standing still, sitting down, or lying down, whether you are active or silent, whether you are in pleasant circumstances or unpleasant situations, plunge your spirit into this question. What is it that sees everything here and now? What is it that hears? So it's with the intensity of following this question. Those of you familiar with Ramana Maharshi, this is his main practice, self-inquiry. Who am I? Who am I? It's a fundamental approach of the jnani. And then if you are a bhakta, on a path of devotion, as it's often translated, your fundamental task is to surrender your ego self to the divine. And Anandamoya Ma, who was a great Hindu mystic of the last century, 20th century, she describes it this way. It is necessary to try to dedicate to the Supreme every single action of one's daily life. Then, when at his lotus feet, one has sacrificed without reserve whatever small power one possesses, so that there is nothing left that one may call one's own. At that very instant occurs the revelation of the indivisible, unbroken perfection which is ever revealed by the self. And again, self with a capital S. So the techniques of these paths can differ quite a bit, but I think the psychological dynamic is the same for both. The underlying dynamic, whether you're a jnani or a bhakti. And a path is designed to bring about two, we could call psychological transformations. The first, through practices of mindfulness and meditation and so forth, we begin to observe the impermanence of our experience. The general impermanence of life, of course, but more than that, the moment-to-moment impermanence. That in every moment, every perception, every sight, every sound, every smell, every thought is arising, it's changing, and it's dissolving. And if you spend time at this practice, and it's well worth spending time at this practice, it will literally transform your perception of the world. Instead of being a world of big, clunky, solid objects that you walk through, it becomes fluid. And it's something you flow through and along with. And more importantly, it begins to show you the futility of trying to grasp at things. There is nothing to grasp onto. And so this relentless trying to grasp things to become happy, this story of I, the basis of this story of I, it begins to lose its power. It ain't going to work. It's just the way life is. We can never become permanently, abidingly happy through this grasping after whatever it is, experience, possessions, people, whatever. They're always changing. It's like music. It's just constantly arising and passing, arising and passing. And it's a good thing, by the way. This sometimes scares people and turns people off. But if you think about it, if it wasn't the case, the world would be a horrible place, just like music. If you took one beautiful note and you hold that note, it turns into torture. And, that's the way the CIIS tortures people. They play them awful music over and over and over. It's the flow of the world that is its beauty. But from the transformative point of view, it's to see that this grasping is futile. And slowly but surely, this transforms us from being worldly seekers into spiritual seekers. Instead of having our energies and our attention scattered in all these little various pursuits here and there, we begin to refocus, redirect all that energy and tension onto the one thing that perhaps can bring us abiding, permanent happiness, and that is enlightenment or realization or union with the divine or whatever you want to call it. So this begins to redirect that wave of attention and to unify that wave of attention. Then we stop living our lives in order just to make ourselves happy. It doesn't mean you have to, quit a householder's life or something like that. It's just instead of getting up in the morning, instead of looking at the whole day as how can I become happy, because you're beginning to realize you're never going to become happy this way, then that opens you to a transformation in the motivation of how and why you live your life. And this is the second big transformation that a spiritual path brings about. And it comes about through cultivating love and compassion. And so we learn, first of all, to lose our fear of love, because we're always afraid if we let go, if we really looked out for the welfare of others and so forth, what's going to happen to me? You know, I'm going to be taken advantage of, I won't get mine and all that. We start to let that go, and we start to truly live selflessly, which means live realistically, because truly there is no self. And the more we do that, the more we discover an interesting thing. This is the path to happiness. And we start to experience it long before enlightenment. We start to experience the joy and the beauty and the freedom that comes with that. And the more we can do that, the more then, oh, well, if this is a taste of what is to come, then more of my attention gets directed there towards enlightenment. And after a while, the old conditioning, of course, still hangs around. We don't just get rid of it overnight. And it arises, and we find ourselves doing self-centered things and this and that. But now, instead of regarding the self as my most prized possession, which I have to do everything to defend or enhance, we start to experience it as a burden. And believe me, it can become an intolerable burden. And then the question isn't, well, how do I keep myself and walk a spiritual path at the same time? The question is, okay, I get it. This is the suffering. This is the pain. This is the hell. Now, how do I get rid of it? And, of course, that's the big one. That's the big catch. So, this is the one thing that a spiritual path cannot do for you. It cannot give you this realization. It cannot give you this enlightenment. It cannot wake you up. It can bring you to this place. And this is the way Ramana Maharshi describes it. He says, he's talking about, the true self. He says, there is no reaching the self. If the self were to be reached, it would mean that the self is not here and now, but it is yet to be obtained. So I say the self is not reached. You are the self. You are already that. So no amount of practice, no amount of doing anything is going to bring you any closer to who you truly are now already at all. It's like the one instruction that none of you could do, with the exception of Bob in the back. Is that Bob? Yes. Is it? Yes.
Kevin. That's Kevin.
Oh, Kevin. Hi, Kevin. Kevin. The one, even if you wanted to, not that you would, is if I say, sit down. You can't do it because you're already sitting down. And so the path brings you to a place where it's saying, sit down. And you don't know you're sitting down yet. You're trying to sit down, but it just ain't going to happen. So if you're a Janani searching for your true self, you're never going to find it. You're already there. If you're a Bhakta trying to surrender yourself, your ego self, that can't happen either. Because as long as you are trying to surrender, you are there. And the more you try to surrender, you're just perpetuating by your attempt to surrender the little self. Oh, I'm going to surrender myself. I'm going to surrender myself. And it's always you right there. This is why Meister Eckhart says, there is one work that remains proper and his own, and that is annihilation of self. Yet this annihilation and diminution of the self, however great a work it may be, will remain uncompleted unless it is God who completes it himself. So surrender always involves this element of grace. You cannot do it. We can get right up to the threshold, so to speak. We can drop all this stuff, but there we are standing on the threshold, and you may have even had little glimpses and so forth, and there you are, and you can't get through. You cannot get through. So, but now here's what the path has really done for you, and you don't know it. And this is why I didn't know it either. If the path has brought you to this conversion from being a worldly seeker to a spiritual seeker, really thoroughly and complete, to the point where you have put all your eggs in one basket, you know there's no happiness in worldly seeking, that this is the only way that real happiness, abiding happiness is possible. You don't know it yet, but there's nothing else, so you might as well, go for it. And if you've burned all your bridges behind you, then you have no choice but to continue trying to do the impossible. If you're a Jnani, you continue trying to find your true self. If you're a Bhakti, you continue trying to surrender. And this is where the path wants you. This is where it was supposed to bring you. This has to be complete now, because if you get to this stage in the path and you say, well, I haven't gotten enlightened yet, maybe I'll go back to law school and try that, it's not going to work. You have to be out on the limb. And then, in this trying to do the impossible, you exhaust the effort to seek. You exhaust the effort to search. You don't stop it. It comes to an end. And Ramana Maharshi has a nice description of this. He says, sadhanas, which are practices, are needed so long as one is not realized. They are for putting an end to obstacles. Finally, there comes a stage when a person feels helpless, notwithstanding the sadhanas. He is unable to pursue the much cherished sadhanas. It is then that God's power is realized. The self reveals itself. Unable. Now, this is very important, because there are a lot of teachings and teachers around who say, well, practices won't get you there, so stop doing your practices. This is not a matter of your deciding to not do your practices. This is a matter of coming to the point where you sit down to practice meditation, and you can't. This is a matter where you go out into the world and you're going to surrender yourself, and it just isn't working anymore. I mean, you can't. You've run out of steam. You run out of effort. And when you're brought to this place, this is the opportunity. Excuse me. What happens is, if there's nothing to do, and there isn't this activity of seeking, of searching for happiness, the self begins to die. Desires cease. There's no point in desiring anything. If there's nothing to desire, there's no point in thinking about anything. Thoughts become quiet. And this experience of self, the delusion of self, the story of I stops, and the delusion just starts to disappear. The Buddhists like to compare this to swinging a firebrand around, and I think it's more appropriate to us to think of it in terms of twirling a sparkler on the 4th of July. Have you ever done that? At night, if you take a sparkler and you go out and you twirl it like this, and if you do it steadily and consistently, you create this illusion that there's a ring of fire in the night, It can be really beautiful. You think, well, I could take that ring of fire and I could take it home and I could hang it over my mantelpiece, admire it. And if you stop moving your arm, it disappears. And so when this activity of seeking comes to an end of its own, that delusion of self just disappears. It's gone. So various traditions have various names for this state, and this is a state. The Christians call it the dark night of the soul, based on John of the Cross's description. Sufis call it fana, the passing away of the self. I call it kenosis, which is a Greek term. I try to pick neutral, tradition-neutral terms, generic terms, which means self-emptying. So it's a state of kenosis. Excuse me.
Usually in Greek, you don't pronounce the G.
This doesn't have a G in it. It has a K, kenosis.
Yeah, you don't pronounce the K. I'm just saying Greek would be gnosis, usually.
No, this would not be gnosis for this. Now you're wrong, see, Elliot. Good. Okay. You're wrong sometimes, Elliot. Okay.
I'm 100%.
All right.
So how do you spell the kenosis?
Kenosis, Kenosis.
Oh, yeah, I see a difference.
in English, I mean, of course, in Greek, it's spelled, with
I was thinking,
gamma something, I don't know what, but
I was thinking of the Gnostic Gospel, something totally.
that lecture is tomorrow night, I think, so, okay? Okay. Okay, so when this happens, when the seeker enters this state of kenosis or dark night of the soul or fana, passing away of the self or whatever, then the attention has nothing to look for, nowhere to go, nothing captivates it, and then it collapses back into that limitless ocean of consciousness, and then the possibility of realization occurs. So, just here a couple of last descriptions about this. Hakyun again, he describes the end of the Zen path for a Zen student. He says, after exerting great effort, he will reach a point where his normal processes of thought, perception, consciousness, and emotion will cease. He will reach the limits of words and reason. He will resemble an utter fool as everything, including his erstwhile determination to pursue the way, disappears, and his breath itself hangs almost suspended. This is the occasion when the tortoise shell is about to crack, the phoenix about to break free of its egg. Here's the Hindu Lali Shwari, and here's how she puts it. There all words and thoughts, as well as Shiva and Shakti, become quiet. In that state, there is no knowledge, no meditation, no Shiva, no Shakti. All that remains is that. O Lali, you are that. And here's the Christian mystic Dionysius the Areopagan. The mystic is plunged into the darkness of unknowing, whence all perfection of understanding is excluded. And he is wrapped in that which is altogether intangible and numinal, being wholly absorbed in him who is beyond all. And through the inactivity of all his reasoning powers, is united by his highest faculty to him who is wholly unknowable. And thus by knowing nothing, he knows that which is beyond his knowledge. So just to summarize this view of the path, we begin, and we all begin as worldly seekers. As the Bhagavad Gita says, we're born into this delusion. And by the way, this seeking is actually has as its root a spiritual wisdom. We know something's wrong. We know we're not happy. And so from the very, the first time we cry for a breath of air, we're seeking. We're seeking a happiness that we've lost. Mythologically, it's the lost paradise. We've been expelled from paradise. So seeking isn't wrong here. It's just we're in our worldly pursuits, we're barking up the wrong tree. And a path's job is to point that out to us, to show us, to convince us thoroughly, not just intellectually, and then to point us in the direction of the right tree. And then we go bark up that tree. But actually, that's the tree we already are. This is the paradox of the path. So we continue doing that because we can't decide to stop seeking. This is the paradox. If I decide to stop seeking, it's just like I decide to surrender. I'm there. Okay, I'm not seeking. I'm seeking to give up seeking. When will seeking stop? Well, I'll try very hard. I'll sit here very quietly. All this activity. But the path, the worldly path, has no end because there's always something else to seek. You always, you get your soulmate and this and that, and you get, well, now I need a house to live in. Okay, so you get the house, and then, now I need the job. And then by now the soulmate's left, so I need another soulmate. It's hard to, keep them all together. And one other thing, a digression here. If you ever actually could get it all together on a worldly plane, so you get the perfect soulmate, the perfect house, the perfect cat, the perfect palm tree. You're in where you Taos. You've got your tofu, perfect tofu for lunch. It's 12:36, and everything, God's in his heaven, and everything's right with the world. At 12:37, it all unravels because it's got nowhere to go but down at that point. So even if it was possible, it's going to be just a split second, and then shh. But a spiritual path, you see, is designed to self-destruct. in both senses of that term. It destroys itself. It brings you to that place where you cannot pursue it anymore. The path is finished, gone. And then when that happens, and you've thrown yourself into it, heart and soul and mind and all that, then it destroys you as well.
Yay.
So, what? The you that never was. It destroys the delusion, if we want to be accurate about it. It destroys that delusion. So a delusion doesn't exist, and yet, it's also, it causes a lot of suffering. It doesn't exist, but it causes a lot of suffering. Let me just close with the words of Lali Shori, because I think she summarizes this beautifully. She says, looking neither left nor right, I pursued Shiva. I pushed myself to my limits in my quest. But when I finally gave up and turned back, there he was within me.
And he was what?
There he was within me.
Within.
Yes. Now, let me say one thing. You can arrive at this kenosis. You can arrive at this place without doing one spiritual practice. You can arrive at this place without having heard of any mystics. It's possible. Life just brings you to a place where everything just comes to a halt. There's no place to go. But why wait? These teachings are available. These practices are available, If you have even a little bit of inkling about it, go out in yourself. Take life into your own hands. Don't wait for lightning to strike. So, that's my little talk about the path to self-destructs. If anybody has any comments or questions, or... Thank you, Elliot. Elliot's like the sign in the studio that goes, applause, applause. Yes?
Well, since you like quotes so much, I have a quote for you, and it gets at that attention you were talking about. Oh. Since you enjoy quotes so much, and I thoroughly love quotes, here's a quote that kind of addresses attention, and it says it probably better than anything I've ever come across. It said this. He says, there's God, and then there's not paying attention.
Very good, very good. Very good. I know how to get some questions. We can all spend the rest of the time meditating here. I have a question. So I get my students going, you see. I threaten them with meditation. Oh, we can spend an hour here meditating. Oh, no, I got a question.
I have a question.
Yes, where are you?
I'm over here.
Ah, good. I only have vision in one eye, so particularly back there, if you guys can raise your hands and make a fuss.
Would you mind sharing what happened on August 13th, 1983?
No, I don't mind sharing. You can read all about it in my book. I did write a book about it if you're interested in the whole story. So let me make it really quick. But I got to a point one night, I was traveling, I was going on a pilgrimage, and I got to a point where nothing was working, and I gave up all my practices and path, and I had burned all my bridges. I couldn't see any future. If I looked in the future, I saw nothing. So I was just sort of running on automatic pilot. And I checked into this cheap motel, and I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up, and I was having trouble sleeping. And I tried to read some book and stuff. I couldn't even get the sentences to gel. So I put it away, and I turned out the light, and I started falling back to sleep. And just when I got to the space, when waking life had left, there was no more sensory experience or anything like that, and thoughts and everything had ceased. And but dreams hadn't started up. These two lines came from a text called Centering that's in the back of Paul Reps's Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. And these are instructions from Shiva to Shakti of the moments that are opportune for waking up. And it says something like, you see, and this is why I need notes to get the exact, but something like, when wakefulness has passed and before dreams have come, in that moment being is revealed. And then those lines, which I'd read many, many times before, by the way, it passed and they dissolved into this nothing. And it was true. Just there it was. And I jumped up and I turned on the light and I looked around and said, oh, I can't believe this. I've been looking for this paradise, the kingdom of God is the way I put it, and here it is in this cheap motel room. I mean, this is it, the carpet, the doorknob, you can't get away from it, dummy. And then I went to sleep, and then I didn't really go to sleep. I mean, I went back and just bathed in radiance, and the next morning I woke up and the world was arising again. I couldn't believe it. This is wonderful. And I went on from there.
Would you say that nothing happened?
Yes, Elliot, nothing happened.
Back here. Forgive me if I'm missing something. This doesn't sound very non-dualistic to me. You know, the self is delusion. The self doesn't really exist. It's not very compassionate for the experience that we have most of the time in the process of, seeking and so forth. And it feels like you've told one half of the story now. The self, that piece, the self doesn't exist. What about the experience of the delusion, the state that we live in most of the time, and how do we hold that alongside the enlightened state, if you like, of selflessness?
Well, I've run across this before here, and all I can say is it's not my experience. I don't live in one deluded state or a state with self and another state without self. There's only, as far as I'm concerned, one reality. This is it. There's consciousness and its forms. And that's what's going on. Now, it's true when I was deluded, and now we're going to run into trouble with words, which are going to start to fail us, badly, because I have to use words when I was deluded and so forth. But I've sometimes tried to be super technical and say when delusion was occurring or something, and it's rhetorically awful. Then the compassion for self is, and it's very important, by the way, I think, to cultivate that. But we're seeing self as a suffering being. I mean, in the process of the compassion, we're disidentifying it as being my true nature. So, and it's extremely important to accept suffering, because if you don't accept your suffering, I mean, if you don't embrace it, you don't know about suffering, and you cannot be compassionate. You can have pity. From my point of view, what I define pity is when you're up here and you're looking down at that poor person, and you say, here's $1, go. Being compassionate is being in the trenches with them and saying, yes, I'm here, I'm with you. Do you know what I mean? I know what you're going through, because I went through it. I'm not up here some other place. So that cultivation of compassion is very different than a self-indulgent self-loving. That, I deserve to get these things that I want and stuff like that. So I do think compassion for self on the path is the springboard for compassion. In fact, that's the way it's taught in Buddhist traditions. If you're doing sending and taking practice, you start with self, and you end with may I be happy, may all beings be happy, and you go from there. You end up with your enemy, which is a tough one if you really do this practice. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I just don't experience life in that sort of split between some sort of, absolute reality and relative reality, or non-dual reality and dual reality. It's just not my experience. God, you're all so solemn. Is this because you've been in therapy?
Hello. I actually don't have a question, but someone was living free, liberated state, and they had a job where they worked in San Quentin, or in other words, they weren't. yeah, I'm not quite sure how to frame it. I mean, maybe you experience this in your own way. If you're free and you're in relationship with the world and other people who reflect not your awakened qualities, but maybe even reject you for your awakened qualities, but kind of share with you their insanity. How does that, what's the toll on a free person with that those kinds of relationships?
First of all, I just have to say, I don't think of myself as having awakened qualities. I mean, one of the things to me, the delight of all this is you're relieved, it sounds terrible, but you're relieved of responsibility for anything anymore. It's like life lives through you, and it's not my responsibility to have awakened qualities or anything like that. When I, as a teacher, and now, see, I do assume roles. I mean, it's not the story's end, it's just that I don't take them to be real. But right now, I'm a teacher. I mean, I'm not actually teaching you people, I'm talking about my role as a teacher. And when I go home with Bob tonight, we'll have some red wine, and then I'll be a guest in his house. And when I go home to my wife, I'll be a husband. And, it just keeps switching, like that. Sometimes
You're assuming that you're going to be leaving, Bob.
That's very true. We can't be attached to our plans. No one knows what's going to happen. I might even get out of here. But as a teacher, I've been challenged and so forth. Once I was doing a seminar, not with my regular students. These were people who were invited from the general public, so I didn't really know them, and they didn't know me. And one of them was getting very upset with my teachings, and with my putting myself up here as some sort of enlightened person, And finally I said, you don't understand. I'm not something special. In fact, I'm nothing. And he said, oh, well, I mean, if that, And I thought, at the time I was working in a paint factory. And if I said to the guys there, I'm nothing, they'd say, oh, Joel, don't be so hard on yourself, You're a good guy. So what can you do, You can't please everybody. So it's their perceptions. And
But do you have any thoughts about the inquiry, apart from even your own personal experience? I mean, here, I'm kind of assuming a lot of the people that are coming to this conference, if they're not therapists, then they're in school, and this is a kind of a special situation. But a lot of people go to school to become therapists, and if they're fortunate enough to get exposed to things like non-duality.
Right.
And then they get a job working in a poor community where they face a lot of resentment, a lot of hostility, a lot of entitlement, whatever the issues, poverty, and these issues of pure consciousness and non-duality just get buried under the difficulties and the politics of their of work and, reality.
I got what you mean. You guys as therapists have a different problem than I have. I don't go out looking for trouble. Like, it comes to me, people come to my door and say, I want to, go on a spiritual path, or what do you got to offer? You guys are going out in the community and prisons and stuff like that. But again, I would just suggest that I think it's great learning as much as you can, techniques and, whatever for therapy, but when you are face-to-face with somebody, you have to let all that go. And you have to let them speak to you. At this paint store I worked at for a couple of years, they were all Christians there, nominally Christians. They go to Sunday. But there was one guy who was he really took it seriously. He wasn't a fundamentalist in the sense of a vindictive sort of person, but he was a literalist. He read the Bible, every night. And, we got along great. We got along great, because he'd come to me and he'd say, Joel, and they knew I was some sort of preacher or something. And he'd say, Joel, it says here in the Bible, Jesus says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. He says, I try to live that, but this guy over there, I can't stand his guts, And we'd have these great conversations, because he was trying to live that life, So you have to meet people where they are. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can't be attached to the fact that you're going to do anything, Sometimes all you can do is if you study a little sending and taking practice internally, you just, wish them well, and you're humble enough to say, okay,
Well, that you said you have to meet people where they are. Let's say, which is, obviously true, but let's say you actually have the capacity to meet them truly where they are, but they don't know they're there. And they're not, so there's an unwillingness on their part.
Okay, see, that's what I mean.
Okay.
I
don't mean to push them, but let's say you can be fully present with them, but they're not interested in being present.
I think it's really important to, when you meet anybody, I mean, any being, anything, that you, whether they realize it or not, that you're honoring what's sacred about them, if you want to put it that way. You're honoring that they are a manifestation of God, And it doesn't matter, I mean, it's not my responsibility to, make them see that. Now, I'm just assuming that because it's going to change our relationship a little bit if I do that. Not because I'm trying to change it, but I'm coming from a different place. I used to work at the Bodhi Tree bookstore. This is after my awakening. I worked there for a year. This is, the Bodhi Tree bookstore down in L.A.? Yes, right. Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, right, West Hollywood with a bunch of characters, And these people would come in. I was a clerk, and they'd come in. And I mean, all kinds of types with, razor blades sticking out of their nose and chartreuse hair and robes and sandals and chanting and, and it was like, oh, here's God. Oh, wow, this is wonderful. Yes, what can I do for you? Oh my gosh, God, that's a fabulous costume. I love that one. It's like working in a Halloween party here, a masquerade ball. It was just incredible. We have a microphone moving around here. Yeah, yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you paint a picture of some of these burned bridges that you were referring to?
Yeah, like I left my career in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I left and there was I couldn't go back now. I mean, it wasn't a choice for me. I'd seen through it and I'd seen that I was never going to become happy doing that. So that's one example. So it was like not having any career. I didn't have any identity as someone who had a career or,
So, in the years that you've been teaching and meeting with other people in this way, could you describe various forms of burnt bridge? I don't mean necessarily particular. Are you saying the burnt bridges are specifically you burn, like this identity as working, particular career or relationship, life situation, all of that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but it is specific. I'm talking more specifically that things that you used to do in order to make yourself happy, mm-hmm. you can no longer do to make yourself happy. Uh-huh. Now, you still might do them,
yes.
for a reason of compassion, but it's no longer to make me happy. Uh-huh. Let me give you an example. This is kind of embarrassing, but it's a very little example. But when I was young, a little kid, I was very embarrassed about peeing in the urinal in the men's room. When we went to a sporting event, and, in the intermission, everybody runs to the bathroom, and I would stand there, and there's a line out there, and, I just, I couldn't go and all that. So if the stall, where you can sit down was open, I'd duck in there, a little privacy, and I'd always lock the door, And I was embarrassed about being embarrassed, almost. And then when I went into the Army, well, I got over that, because any of you who've been in the Army, that goes quickly. So then when I got out, this was in 68, and then I came here to San Francisco, and I became a hippie and all that, and we lived in communes, and it was considered bourgeois character structure to lock your bathroom door, have any sense of privacy, see? And this was difficult for a lot of these middle-class kids, to do. Well, sure, have the bathroom door open, invite the whole commune in to watch me pee. It didn't matter to me at all, So I've told you this. So then later I'm up at this house of this philosopher sage, Franklin Merrill Wolff, in the country, and all these people would come up and visit him, and I was in the bathroom, and it was in a house, and there was one bathroom, and that everybody who came as visitors would use, and I was there, and the door, I hadn't locked the door, it was closed, and there I was doing my business, and the door opened, and this elderly woman popped in. Oh, she was so embarrassed. She closed the door. And I realized, that made her really uncomfortable. So I started locking the door again. So I went back to doing what I originally done, but a totally different motivation. It was for her sake and people like that. People don't necessarily want to walk in on me. I mean, I'm not Robert Redford after all, So, so that's an example of changing outward, you're changing your inner motivation more than changing your outward behavior. You may change your outward behavior as well, but there's this you can never go back to that grasping, greedy lifestyle or approach to life. Not, I shouldn't say lifestyle, but that. So that's why I say if the spiritual path doesn't pan out and you say, well, I'll go back to law school, it's like, oh, well, okay, there is maybe a possibility of getting happiness in the world. But that's stopping short of where a spiritual path is trying to take you.
So you may say continue on something, but you don't know why the hell you're doing it anymore. That kind of thing. I mean, you may not be doing it because you think it'll make you happy, a career or this or that, but...
Well, oddly, see,
or you
okay.
think
I don't know if this is answering your question. I do things now because I'm happy.
I was talking about up until
Oh.
that burnt, that last...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I stopped doing all the things that I was doing to try to get happy, I had nothing. What else could I do? I felt like I tried everything now, you see. I was lucky in a certain sense. My life cooperated with this, I had been a beatnik poet, I'd been a soldier, I'd been a hippie, I'd been a communist revolutionary, I'd been a Hollywood producer. I mean, I tried a lot of things in life, and they didn't do it. So when I got there, in that motel room, I had nowhere to go.
Thanks.
Yeah, run out of stuff is a good way to put it.
The thing that I've kind of garnered from you tonight,
Excuse me, what?
the thing that I've garnered from you tonight, the whole thing, is that you are speaking with joy.
Wow. Is that
No,
a
no,
problem
no.
here with therapists? Uh-oh.
No, because you refer to happiness, but when you had your awakening, it seemed to me that from there on you were just expressing your joy, and whatever you did, it was joy.
I hesitate to say joy because I have moods like everybody else. I'm not always up and so forth, and I can be irritated and whatnot. So it's not always joy the way we think of it. I've thought about this over the years, how to express this. Happy is such a diluted word in our culture, But I would say it's like a deep appreciation. And I like to use this analogy. It's like, what's your favorite movie? Or one of your favorite movies?
Too sudden for me to think about.
Well, what?
The Dead.
The
John
Dead.
Huston's last film.
What?
John Huston's last film.
Oh, I don't know that one, huh? Cheery title. I'm sure it'll be a big hit. Anyway, whatever it is, think of your favorite movie, and the best movies evoke a range of emotions in us. Cheap little Friday Night the 13th massacre with a hacksaw. That gets one emotion going, fear. And, people pay good money to experience fear in the safe circumstances. But a good movie, you have fear, you have sadness, you have laughter, you have pathos, you have anger, all these emotions. And the movie's full of conflict and full of difficult situations and injustices and all that. And in the movie, you're supposed to feel these things. If it doesn't arouse these emotions, it's a bad movie, You can say, oh, I don't know, that was kind of dull, sort of lackluster. And we feel all these things, and we go away, and we come away with a deep appreciation of the artistry of the film. Do you know what I'm talking about? And we wouldn't change anything. We wouldn't go back and say, well, I know, that scene was a little sad. Let's yank that one out. And that scene expressed anger. Let's yank that one out. And that scene, if you do that, you get down to, I'll tell you what you get down to, and you've all had this experience. You get down to the night your best friends just got married, invite you over to see the wedding tapes for 3 hours. That they're fascinated with it because it's the story of I. It's, oh, look, there's Janet over there. Look. And you're, 3 hours. Because nothing's happening. There's no conflict. There's no, So this is the...
maybe I should put it another way, because I do feel that you have a running stream. You've been to Tassajara Hot Springs, right? You ever been there?
No,
Where
I
there's a
haven't.
spring.
No, I've heard of it. It's great.
There's a water, and it goes. The stream runs all the time. It doesn't stop. And you hear it all the time. Sometimes you go in and out of it, but it's always there. And it seems to me that what you have experienced is this inner state of peace, despite all these other things you're talking about, that you can have that. And I feel that it's that, and I put joy in there because no matter what happens, you still come back to who you are.
I
That's
enjoy
my
life.
definition.
This is getting embarrassing. You're talking about me and, my states and
But
this and
you're
that.
talking about something that we're supposed to be able to try to
I enjoy life.
understand with you.
And I would come down to this, a spiritual path is, not learning how to enjoy life. That's, again, like assuming that, here's the difference. There are a lot of things we do to become happy. Then some mornings we wake up and we're happy. We're just happy. It's a beautiful day. I don't know. We don't even know for why we're happy. We get up and, and we start singing. Oh, what a beautiful morning. You get in the shower. You're not singing to become happy. You're singing to express your happiness. You see what I'm talking about? You're nothing to get, but you're not just...
But the awakening had to do something very fundamental.
Yes, it
That
shows you
carries-
you're happy. What are you struggling for so much? What are you working on? You're happy. Express it.
We're using
Show us all.
We're using different words, that's all.
Yes, I think we are. I think we are. But you're right. It does, in one sense, fundamentally change your life. In another sense, it's retroactive. It goes from one end of time to the other end, wipes everything out in that sense. But don't worry about that one. Elliot, what?
So this is
And this is going to be a short,
No,
succinct.
this is a paid advertisement that I've done 5 courses with Joel in Lone Pine and in Bishop. And his silence is much better than his words. Most of these, you're seeing the worst part of it.
Thank you for your paid advertisement, Elliot.
Never gets worse than this. See, most of these courses were all-day courses. There were no words at all. Like we had to get a rock from the mountain and meditate on the rock. And maybe it was like a 10-hour course and there was like a half-hour of words, right? So this is the worst of him. And it's like the wordless state, there's a direct transmission. And in the words, I wouldn't even come back for the words.
Is that a promise, Elliot? Elliot.
Okay, but I do have a question. It's
Yeah,
a
go
second
ahead.
question. So everyone here probably has read your book, Naked Through the Gate. And in that book you say, after August 13th, 1983, nothing happened.
Yes.
But see, everyone here thinks something may have happened, that you may even have arrived tonight. So I'd like you to explain what that's like since August 13th, 1983, that nothing ever, 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 ever happened. And you did once before.
Would you come up and explain it? I don't remember what I said once before.
Try again.
Try again. What was the context?
Well,
Give me a hint.
about that
What do you want to know?
there was something that was steady. Before August 13th, there was something.
Yeah, okay. Here. First of all, I don't know if this was the case, but people often ask me, why don't you now write another sequel, an autobiography? What's happened to you since then? And I said, nothing's happened to me. I mean, what am I going to write about, So maybe that's what you mean.
Exactly.
But Dogen, I think, has the best line about this, Zen Master Dogen. He says, oh God, he says it so beautifully, I'm going to botch it. But he says something like, if you take hold of profound practice, you will, if you let go of profound practice, you will have spectacular realization. And if you let go of a spectacular realization, profound practice will hold up the universe. And then he's another line. He says, and when you let go of spectacular realization, it dies and it's gone, and that absence remains forever.
So you're
And-
in the absence, really.
Yeah, I mean, you can't hang on to realization. I mean, if you do, what you do is, then you make it into an experience. It's not an experience. And then you conceptualize it, and then you put it in a little box, and you tie it up, and you put it in your closet, and every once in a while you bring it out, and you look at it, ooh, I had this realization. You put it back. Other people come, and you show them your realization, and put it back.
This was the secret I wanted you to
throw it away.
So this was the secret you said in Lone Pine, home of Franklin Melville. You said everyone else thinks I'm a presence and I am an absence.
Yes, something like that. I know. You're hanging on to it. I let it go back in Lone Pine. I don't remember.
I thought it was so profound it blew my mind.
Good.
Thank you.
But then
You're
it came back. It was meant for his experience, I hope.
Exactly.
It was. It was.
Thank you, Joel.
You're welcome. I'm glad somebody thanks me around here, Elliot.
I'm a fan of one. Fan club of one.
Aren't I lucky?
So another question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I wonder if you could speak to, after the August date, encounters with your conditioning.
I enjoy them. I mean, I don't know. There are two kinds of conditioning, in my view of things. There's self-centered conditioning.
Yeah, those.
Self-centered conditioning is conditioning that is, I don't know how to put it, it's like a gravitational field. There's a self in the center of it, and so the conditioning forms around that. Do you know what I mean? And when you take the self out of that, there's no more self-centered conditioning. Like, I don't wake up in the morning and think I'm going to be happy if I have some Cheerios. I do wake up in the morning and think I'm going to have some Cheerios, you know. Oh, but if there's no Cheerios, okay, I'll have an English muffin or whatever's around. But there's other kind of conditioning that, you know, this is, I grew up in New York, an Italian neighborhood. So I like Italian food, lasagna, you know. If I grew up in China, I might like sea slugs. I loathe sea slugs. I mean, loathe is too strong a word. They're not appealed to this donkey's palate. This is pure conditioning. I speak English, for God's sake. I mean, I was conditioned to speak English, fortunately, because I've got a terrible languages, but if I grew up in France, I'd be speaking French. You know, I mean, it's not about getting rid of conditioning. There would be no form at all. A form is conditioning. So it's about the self-centered conditioning, that conditioning that, again, works, it sort of doubles back on itself and gets itself tied into a knot, you know? And then but then there is something that happens that conditioning is appropriate or inappropriate. So I come from New York, so I'm loud, I'm brash, and this and that. I come to Eugene, Oregon, and, you know, some people, they find it rude, they find it offensive, they find, you know, it becomes a barrier sometimes for relationships or teaching and all that. Oh, okay, so I notice that, and then, you know, I try to attenuate it, you know, I try to tone it down or whatever. And so but that's not, it's not something I work on. You know, I hate that term. I hear people say, we're working on our relationship. I say, oh boy, oh boy. It happens, you know, and it's just, and that's part of the fun. I mean, that's part of the, you know.
So do your responses in certain situations surprise you?
Ooh, that's a good question. Do they surprise me? Well, in one sense, they're always surprising me. I've gotten kind of used to it after, you know, 20 years here, but in a certain sense, it surprises me that there's continues to be something here. But a specific...
Or maybe another way of saying it is, are you sometimes surprised by the intensity of your response to things?
No, I'm usually, although my wife might disagree, but I'm usually.
Now we're getting warmer.
Yeah, I promised her I would not talk about her, so I'm not. And it's not because I talk about her and then she hears about it and she says, you don't talk about me when I'm not around and stuff. So I said, okay, all right, I won't talk about it. But I have no problem talking about it. And there's always stories about me. I mean, there's always telling stories of myself. You know? But no, but yes, there are times. I mean, I don't have a perfect relationship with her. There's no question about it. But look, why would you want to? And what would that mean? The day you had the perfect relationship, the next moment it's all going to fall apart again. You know. Right. So to me, it's like this is what makes it interesting. We're always dancing, and in that sense, it's surprising. You know, there's still one big mystery in the universe. I mean, it's all mystery, but there's one specific mystery, I should say. Sometimes I look at my wife and I go, oh my God, I don't understand anything here. I am never going to understand. And viva the mystery, you know? Because if I can get a computer as a companion and I would understand it all. And if something went wrong, I'd call Bob and I'd say, come fix my computer. So to me, it's a delight. It's not a source of frustration, let me put it that way, or irritation. To me, that's what makes it.
Right. And that's the contrast with what you experienced before the August date.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, I had to control everything. I had to know everything. I was a big know-it-all.
Well, Mr. Know-It-All.
We're going to end on that note? Oh, my God.
As fun as this has been, I can't wait to get home and have that glass of red wine with you.
Yes, that Bordeaux you showed me the other night. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, the $2 chuck.
Oh, the $2 chuck, okay. I'll try anything once.
Okay. Well,
anyway, I want to thank you all for showing up here. And
thank you, Joel.